There's a study done by, I believe it was McKinsey in late 2020. They had looked at the Fortune 500 companies, and the majority of them had opened up new roles. They hadn't closed roles based on these new AI technologies. And I think what we're going to find when we look at the historical record, we're going to see the same thing happen to the same thing happened now that happened back then with bank tellers. So for those of you who don't know, when bank tellers were, before the ATM was invented, about 80% of their time was spent just doing the work of an ATM. And so when ATMs were widely proliferated, we thought that, well, we only need 20% of them now because 80% of their time was spent doing that. But when ATMs hit the market, the number of bank tellers actually went up because the companies were opening up more banks, because now all of a sudden they can man more banks with less people. And that shows us that the problem at that point was that there was a constriction on the supply side of the market, not on the demand side. So right now, we want 10 times more developers. I think we want multiple times more artists. I think we want multiple times more of a lot of these jobs that we're worried that AI is going to be taking over, because it's not taking over, it's going to be augmenting. But this cap has been on supply, not on demand.
The following is my conversation with Garik Tate. Garik is an AI futurist, investor, and AI strategy consultant. With a decade of entrepreneurial experience, he has founded and led successful companies in software development, outsourcing, and publishing. His expertise lies at the intersection of AI, IQ, and EQ, getting his clients' businesses to achieve increased profits and ultimately get acquired at higher valuations. We discussed how to stay competitive in the job market despite the threat of AI automation, the relationship between creativity and fear, and his vision for AI 100 years from now. Enjoy our conversation. Garik, thanks for coming on the podcast, my man.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Excited to have you, and I'm super excited to talk about the hottest topic we seem to see all the time, AI. And I know on a personal note, you're an AI futurist, an AI investor, an AI consultant, but I want to start on a really peculiar note, and I'm not sure if you've been asked this before, but personally, are you scared about how fast AI has evolved over the last few years?
I definitely am a little bit concerned with how these, how good these AIs are at taking our attention, and if we're optimizing them for the wrong metrics, I do think that we could get a little bit more of the same of the types of issues we're already having. But overall, I would definitely say that there are some people who are very utopic about it, and some people who are very dystopic about it. And the reality is, it's probably going to be right down the middle. And so overall, I have a little more of an optimistic bent, but it's never going to be as bad or as good as you think.
We love the bullishness there, and hopefully we can all have that optimism around AI and use it to enhance our capabilities and future productivity. And I'll get into a little bit more about that later. But on a slightly more micro note, I actually heard on another podcast, I think it was Lex Friedman's podcast, and he's, a big MIT guy, really kind of a great STEM dude, also has a great podcast, shameless plug there. But I heard him say that we've actually had the data capacity for years. So a lot of the information that we get from ChatGPT, when you think about that back-end database and all that information being available, he actually said that that's been there for years, but we've only recently been able to kind of present it in a succinct and concise way. So can you just talk a little bit about what's the coding look behind that in order to be able to present it in such a nice manner?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the big gunshot moment with AI was the release of ChatGPT in late 2022, and ChatGPT's fundamental breakthrough, I would say, is that it's sent more data at the transformer than any other company had done before. So the innovation was actually the transformer. OpenAI's ChatGPT was just send more data at it. So what is a transformer? A transformer was invented way back in 2017 in the white paper, Attention is All You Need. And it detailed out this new kind of architecture where when it took in data points, it would take it into the broader context and start finding patterns inside that broader context. So rather than just guessing the next word in the sequence, it would look at guessing the next word in the sequence given the paragraph, given the story, given the chapter, so on and so forth. And that white paper, it's been out for a while. People didn't even, people inside the space thought it was very interesting, but it only exploded like it did when OpenAI released ChatGPT and sent that data there. And so I am really curious because I feel like recently we've been milking the transformer architecture for all it's got. And we're definitely plateauing in some ways. But the thing that I'm really excited by is what are some white papers out there either already have been written and we're just not paying enough attention, or are going to be written and are true innovations that will really push the space forward. Because right now we're just squeezing the juice out of the fruit so far.
On that note, on one of the things that you just said, why do you think we're plateauing as opposed to still staying on that exponential curve?
So every exponential curve is ultimately a S curve. So
Mhm.
an exponential curve that lasts a long time, like what we've been seeing with Moore's law and transistors, is really, it's not a single S curve; it's a stack of S curves stacked on top of each other.
Okay,
And
understood.
uh, the way that you can prolong Moore's law the longest is actually to break new ground in a new paradigm, and that new paradigm breaks new territory, and that new territory you can then find more innovations that allow more S curves, and you just keep on stacking that for as long as possible. But because we live in a physical reality, and physical reality, has
Limitations.
uh, yeah, limitations. It's always going to be actually an S curve, and so that's a first thing to make sure we're talking about the same language. Where are we at right now inside the AI S curve? We're definitely getting better and better of making the core model. The way that I think about it is like it's getting better at talking with itself, and we're getting better at it also bouncing ideas back and forth with reality rather than being stuck in its own head. So this is where technologies or like prompt engineering, like think about this step by step, and where it gives a conclusion at the end rather than the beginning. So rather than doing confirmation bias, instead it's thinking it through step by step, so it's not uh, turned aside by confirmation bias. We're starting to get better and better results with prompt engineering, with better and better models. But at the end of the day, if I ask ChatGPT 3.5 to write me a haiku, and I ask ChatGPT 4 to write me a haiku, subjectively, is one gonna be better than the other? I mean, maybe, maybe not. Um, and when I say we're plateauing, I think it's coming from that point of view that a lot of what we're hoping to get out of these models in marketing and business, in practicalities, while the space is advancing and we are getting better and better results, um, I think that the people who would be playing with ChatGPT 5 versus 4 very often are getting a similar um, practical output for
So,
real world situations.
to take that thought a little further, do you think that we're kind of primarily plateauing due to just how humans perceive AI or how we're going to use AI, or just to the limitations of the transformers moving forward?
No, in this case, the argument I'm putting forward is more about how humans use AI. So that I think the technology will continue to advance, but a lot of the practical things we want it to do are plateauing. Now, the thing is, as the technology gets more advanced, we're gonna start finding out that it can do new things. So there's this idea of emerged functionality where you don't. I think that the famous example is we didn't teach um, the AI a certain like African language, like
Mhm.
that didn't really show up in the data set anywhere. But then at a certain point, it didn't like get better and better at this one African language. I wish I had knew the one.
It's all good.
Uh, but we witnessed it all of a sudden just one day it knew how to speak this language. But it was a weird thing because when we looked at the history and we asked it questions there before, it wasn't like it was getting better and better. It just all of a sudden snapped in and then it knew enough. And we don't fully know why that is because based on how we understand it, that shouldn't be possible. Like if there's anything that I think when you really understand AI, a lot of the spooky stuff goes away. But that's one thing that is a little bit spooky. That it all of a sudden it just knew it. And so I do think that as the technology gets better, new capacities will emerge. Um, but in the capacities of how a lot of people are using it um, for writing copy, writing marketing materials, using it to skip out on schoolwork,
Mhm.
um, doing market research. A lot of those things I think that will definitely get better and better, but we're not gonna get like leaps and bounds as often. I could be wrong. Definitely want to stay humble when making these kinds of predictions, but
Mm.
um, That's at least what I've been seeing over the last year and a half.
Yeah, I wonder. I'll get into some of the future AI stuff, but it's incredible to see just the development in the last 2 years of how much that this stuff has really grown. I always kind of think to myself, like, what if I had this when I was in high school? I can't imagine what it's like being a high school teacher now. I mean, you're basically teaching something, and even someone who's putting in very minimal effort can just kind of go online and ask the computer how to do it. Must be a crazy time to be a teacher right now.
Yeah, it's a weird thought of like when you're teaching somebody today how to do math, are you teaching them how to do the math in their head, or are you teaching them how to work with a calculator? And with generative AI, it's working bottom up rather than the top down. So what I mean by that is that humans have system one and system two thinking. This is Thinking Fast and Slow by from Daniel. I think Daniel Kahneman is how you pronounce his name.
Mm.
And in that book, he talks about system one, system two. System one is bottom up. It's very fast. You're making implicit logical leaps. It's creative. And system two is analytical, rational, systematic, and it's top down. So that means that system two is like you're following an algorithm. At the end, you're gonna reach a certain point. System one is like you're thinking it more experientially. You're thinking about what have you seen before, empirically versus rationally. And so with every machine that we've built, every machine intelligence we built up to this point, Turing machines and such, they all are top down. So calculators are top down. If you say what's 2 plus 2, it'll spit out the same number every time.
Mhm.
But if you go into ChatGPT right now and ask it what's 5 quadrillion, 200 billion, and then give it a ridiculously large number, and you say times another equally ridiculous number, 4 trillion, whatever, it will give you an output that's the wrong output. It will give you the wrong number, but it will tell you what it thinks the number is. Because if you ask it what's 2 plus 2, it will say 4 every single time because it's seen a billion examples of 2 plus 2 equals 4. But it's seen 0 examples of 5 trillion, et cetera, et cetera. So it's thinking about it bottom up, not top down. If you're doing a calculator, though, it's never seen it. It doesn't matter because it still knows how to do it. It follows the same process every time. So it's thinking through a system 2 style framework. And so these AIs are very different from working with calculators because they're fundamentally working on a different way. But with teachers, like, are we teaching people how to think by themselves, or are we teaching them how to think with machines, and what's going to be more valuable? It's a different paradigm.
For sure. I would think it's the latter, but the issue is, and I don't put the blame here on the teachers because, they went to school, to become educators, and then they probably spent a few years learning, the classic education techniques that have been around for the last 50, 60 years, however many it been. And then in 2 years, you get this new thing called Chat GPT, and you have like the calculus teacher, the Spanish teacher, and like everyone's, somehow an expert in Spanish, but realistically it's Chat GPT. So I honestly don't know. I would lose my mind being a teacher right now. So, I guess the one suggestion, my unprofessional suggestion I would have is if there could be some kind of, I don't know if there could be some universal curriculum written on ChatGPT, or at least like district by district to have a meeting about it and at least try to strategize how you can use it to enhance your kind of classroom work. So it'll be cool to see where that dynamic is going forward. Must be a pain to be a teacher right now for sure.
It's definitely exciting. It's definitely a new set of problems, but because we're all, my biggest worry is us on a macro level making too fast moves. So in other words, on a federal level, institutionalizing. Okay, this is how we're gonna teach with AI, and this is how we're gonna do it when it's been out for like less than a year,
Mhm.
and so
We don't know enough about
it's
it to be able to like kind of
yeah,
regulate it the right way.
it's painful because change is accelerating, but if we're doing top down like regulations, you want to think through those things um, at the right speed. You don't want to jump to conclusions too early. So my way of looking at it is like, yeah, teachers have new challenges in front of them, but they also have new tools. And right now is a fun time to be trying out a whole bunch of things. We're all in it together. So just continuing that conversation. And letting people trade best practices. Hopefully, we get emerging from the bottom up the right practices.
For sure. That's how you know the difference between someone who's like worried about teachers and an AI optimist. I loved how you were able to put that explanation there. On a similar note, so right now we have like a lot of these great AI tools. ChatGPT, for example, is probably the most popular one. A lot of people can just kind of use it to ask really simple, really easy questions, but it also has these really large, calculating or capabilities to, really process a lot of information that kind of moves much faster than humans do. I wanted to ask, do you think that someone has to have some sort of computer science proficiency in order to be able to use ChatGPT in that way? Or do you think that people can kind of streamline their education when it comes to being able to use, the calculated or kind of the really computational uh, words of ChatGPT?
Let me make sure I understand the question. So you're asking what kinds of background do people need to maximize their usage of ChatGPT? So like if you want to be the best prompt engineer, what kind of skills should you know in order to become that prompt engineer? Or can you rephrase it?
Sure. So I think a better way for me to ask it is, do you think that people need an extensive background in computer science to be able to kind of utilize the full computational capability of AI, or do you think that there's some way to kind of streamline an education and then you can kind of use it, to the maximum of its ability?
Got it. I think that there's a great quote by Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI.
The founding father of OpenAI, we might
Yeah,
add. That's what
one
his
of them.
name will
One of
be.
them. Yeah.
We'll coin that right now, and when they're using it in 30 years, we'll be able to quote it from this podcast.
and he gave this observation that the best ideas of how to use the technology were coming from people who did not have a computer science background,
Interesting.
essentially because they're not losing the tree for the forest. So if you're an engineer trying to optimize a tool like OpenAI, um, you'll be so focused on just like your particular part of that forest. You're just going to focus on your tree. You might lose the forest for the trees. And I think it's a similar story actually with any game developer. Game developers will tell you they're the best players at that game for exactly 1 week after launch, and then other people are going to get better. And so I think that the skill set of using the technology versus a skill set of building code that might maximize that technology or improve the base technology, which very few people are doing that. Most people are just building other tools that integrate with it. They are going to be, in my mind, very different skill sets.
Do you think that it's because a lot of people who, say, for example, the engineers that build ChatGPT, they're almost really siloed into kind of the hard coding and the science behind it, as opposed to someone that just comes in, they can be a little more creative and kind of not have to worry about all like the nuts and bolts of the coding of it?
I think that's a big piece of it. That's kind of what we're referring to here. But one factor I want to throw out there in thinking about that way is that the the magic in my mind of why ChatGPT became so big, and now there's a lot of other competitors, Claude and the Llama models, and what's the other one? Of course, Gemini, Google's Gemini now. But the magic of these models and why they've just exploded in popularity because these tools were already, excuse me, they were already out there for a while. But what made them so accessible, or what made them explode, was that they became far more accessible with ChatGPT. All of a sudden, anybody could just go in, and you didn't need to know anything to play with it. So they've smoothed out all the rough edges, and they've smoothed out all the friction points in order to access and play with them. And that's when they exploded in popularity. And when these engineers are working on, when they're working on their one little tree inside that broader forest, they're doing it trying to build a tool that is extremely flexible and it's extremely intuitive in order to play with. And that's and because they're focusing on that, that's why society has been able to maximize it so well.
God, it's so interesting. The people that build it want it to be used or kind of see one way of using it, and perhaps it's kind of used in that way. But other people, like you come in with like a kindergartner's mindset, and you have these crazy enhancements in the capabilities. Really, really fascinating stuff, and such an interesting concept. It reminds me a lot of I think it's called the Spaghetti Challenge or something like that. I think I actually spoke about it with another guest, but I think have you ever heard about it, the Spaghetti Challenge?
No, I haven't.
So it's this one exercise that they do, I think in MBA classrooms, but essentially they give you like 12 sticks of like spaghetti, and some marshmallows, and I forget if they give you tape or not, but essentially like the goal is to build like the highest possible tower. And
Ah,
essentially, so there's like three demographics of like people that perform kind of from best to worst, and the ones that do the best are engineers. They have an education and stuff. They know they know structures. But the second best is kindergartners, and after that MBA students. So the logic is that a lot of times people specifically MBA students who might not be as kind of scientifically apt, but they're good at kind of all the business functions, accounting, marketing. Sometimes they approach things in like a very siloed way, and they're trying to do things by the rule book. And then like kindergartners come in and then they just build like these tall structures because they were just kind of screwing around the whole time. So I think always like an interesting metaphor of sometimes how like the more we study something, the more we don't know. So it'll be fascinating to see where that is
I
moving
love
forward.
that. I love that. So yeah, it's about specialization there, and if you know how to build this, you become the best. If you know how to do something else, and you're rewarded all your life for being a great MBA, like you probably have gotten praise for being there, and that's a mindset. You're there to fucking do the calculations and find the holes in the market and lead teams, and then you're doing something totally outside of that wheelhouse. They're probably just also nervous and then you lose some of that creativity. That's a really great story. I love that.
A deer in the headlights for sure. On a similar note, or kind of moving back to the AI conversation, so something that a lot of people are worried about is the fact that AI can very easily probably do the jobs of a lot of operators or a lot of individual contributors much faster and much easier. And also, candidly, I hate to use this example, but machines don't get sick, which we'll probably hear a lot of corporate America mentioning in the future. So, how do you think someone can more approach AI with learning mindset, or how can someone utilize AI to stay more competitive among the workforce in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And the AI taking jobs is something that a lot of people are worried about, and it makes sense too,
For sure.
because people have been worried about this kind of thing since the Industrial Revolution. Actually, I think that Luddites were the people that smashed the machines um, of the automatic weavers, which was literally the first major innovation of the Industrial Revolution. So, like right at the very, very, very beginning. Um, and so the way that I look at that is that these AIs, they aren't doing anything that we're not telling them to do. They're not Skynet. And so if your job is taken by AI, your job not going to be taken by AI. It's going to be taken by someone else using AI. And they're going to be the one to take your job. And now maybe that person is someone who has the same skill set as you, and they're just doing 10 times more work because they're able to maximize themselves with AI. Or maybe it's an engineer uh, using the tool. But I think that a lot of uh, sectors are already saying that it's not
Like an all-in-one
very
solution.
easy to take people's jobs with this stuff.
Yep.
The Because the AI still works on basically a fundamentally just an inputs outputs model. You give it a certain input, and then it's going and it spits out an output. And for those of us who have a job that we're really just a cog in a machine where that input and output is always the same. It's always the same format. It's very, very clear.
Then you're highest
You
at
know,
risk, probably.
then it's higher at risk. But for a lot of us, that's maybe 40% of our job, but it's definitely not the majority. And what we're actually finding, there's a study done by I believe it was McKinsey in late 2023. They had looked at the Fortune 500 companies, and the majority of them had opened up new roles. They hadn't closed roles based on these new AI technologies. And uh, I think what we're going to find when we look at the historical record, we're going to see the same thing happen to bank. The same thing happened now that happened back then with bank tellers. So for those of you who don't know, when bank tellers were before the ATM was invented, about 80% of their time was spent just doing the work of an ATM. And so when ATMs were widely proliferated, we thought that, well, we only need 20% of them now because 80% of their time was spent doing that. But when ATMs hit the market, the number of bank tellers actually went up because the companies were opening up more banks, because now all of a sudden they can man more banks with less people. And that shows us that the problem at that point was that there was a constriction on the supply side of the market, not on the demand side. So right now we want 10 times more developers. I think we want multiple times more artists. I think we want multiple times more of a lot of these jobs that we're worried that AI is going to be taking over, because it's not taking over, it's going to be augmenting. But this cap has been on supply, not on demand.
So on
Kind
that
of a
note,
long-winded answer. Sorry, that was
no,
a
no,
bit
that
rambling.
was a really good answer. Actually, I thought of another theory just now that you mentioned that, and you know, obviously, much more about AI than I. You know, who am I? I'm just a schmuck with a mic. But basically, with
Both of
regards,
us.
yeah, but the way I thought of it, I think maybe a lot of people are worried because it's more of a short-term mindset. But I think the story that you brought up, which I haven't heard before, I really appreciate you sharing. Really, really interesting, in the sense that maybe if there's AI, maybe there might be some short-term churn among the workforce, but long-term, if AI produces more output, inherently, kind of that output may go hand in hand with demand. The more demand, the more kind of need for people in the workforce, and the more people in the workforce, the further economic prosperity. So in the long run, is there that possibility that like with more output, this is like really good for our economy and good for like the broader job sector?
Yeah, the way the economists look at this is, it's labor, capital, and land.
Mm,
And AI is fundamentally, at some future point it might blur the lines between labor and capital, but at
mm.
this point a lot of that's overblown. It's really just a new form of capital, and for the most part it's really just augmenting what we're already doing. And unless that what we're doing is just a cog in a machine, and then sure, it might replace that one part, but then it frees up what we're doing to do that more complex work.
Okay, will be cool to see where that dynamic moves in the future for sure. On kind of a more smaller note, I know a lot of the work that you do is focused in the product development area and kind of really helping teams build out those MVPs. You know, from your perspective, what functions, at least in the immediate future, do you think AI will be able to automate, or kind of what industries do you think it'll be most significant in the short term?
The space that I play in the most is in the space of um, marketing, customer service, and employee onboarding. Actually, there's 5 areas that I think AI is impacting for most businesses, which is prospecting, onboarding the customer, onboarding your team members, which is basically just HR, and then the last is data transformation. If you need to do data entry work, cleaning data, or reformatting it. And so those 4 areas, I think the AI can impact a lot if we can define its inputs and outputs properly. Which that part's harder than most people think. But when they can do that, then they can scale quite well with AI.
Okay. So it really depends more on kind of the individual, well, specifically to the industry that you just mentioned, but it more depends on how an individual is able to kind of utilize it, and that'll help them scale within their role.
Yeah, the way that I look at it, and the way I coach my clients through this is, what is a constraint on your business first and foremost.
Mm,
There's this great book called The Goal by Eli Goldratt, which is it's a fable, but it was written way back in the day of it was actually written for manufacturing, for factory workers. And the idea was, which part of the factory is the constraint? Because if you improve the factory behind that constraint, you've made the problem worse, not better. Because then that constraint just becomes more constrained, and you've actually probably decreased the output of the overall factory, even though you've improved some components of it. So you have to put all of your focus on optimizing for and improving for that one constraint of the business. And for a lot of businesses, after you've reached a point of product market fit and you have a little bit of a regular deliverable model, there's probably only 1 or 2 areas of the business. If you improve those areas, then the entire business would double. And so if you can identify that and then say, okay, I'm not using AI because of FOMO. I'm not using AI because it's what I should be doing. I'm using it. I'm looking at AI as a specific tool can I solve this specific problem, then your business's growth can really get unlocked. So you got to take that mindset.
Got it. So more of trying to hone in on the constraint and utilizing AI to alleviate the constraint.
Yes.
Oh,
Because AI is such a powerful tool. It can be used for almost any set of inputs and outputs, but you need to take a problem first mindset rather than just kind of use it because it's fun.
yeah, a problem at a time. To switch to a similar idea, I think one of the bigger problems with AI and something that is also a lot of people are concerned with. I mean, personally, I'll get into more of this later, but I'm also pretty bullish on the idea, but I'm also sensitive to the fact that a lot of people, this is, a lot to process for them. But one of the big concerns or one of the big topic areas is that there's the potential for a lot of spread of misinformation. Like as AI gets more developed, I forget what the model was I saw the other day on the Wall Street Journal, but I think Sora it's called. It's getting really, really good at
Yeah.
like making really realistic looking stuff. And there's probably endless possibilities going on there. So, as users of AI and, as or maybe consumers, how can we stay on top of potential misinformation?
So I think that we need some major innovations there. That this is definitely an area where there's going to be a mixture of cultural adaptation as well as hopefully technical innovations. But we've had this problem of fake news or misinformation for quite a long time, and what I'm hoping to see is that we can start uh, using a little more of a model using 3.0 technology, Web 3.0 or basic blockchain technology, where you will not be able to spoof identity. And then we
Mhm.
start tying more and more uh, information while respecting people's privacy, which that's definitely a huge problem. How do you do this while we're still optimizing for people's privacy and people's control of their own data? But can we start creating a little more of a reputation system
Mhm.
where we we only take data in from those sources that historically have done their own fact checking, historically have done um, their own work there, and that's basically the model of trusting institutions like the New York Times and Google trusts data websites if those websites have been uh, uh, provided truthful, valuable data in the past. Like this is still the model that we have been using for a while. It just has to be ratcheted up to a better level and has to be anti-spoofable. I think with Web 3.0.
Do you think that reputation is going to come more from the companies themselves, or it's going to come more from a federal framework that makes these companies kind of act in a more, I'll say, secure manner?
I'm not exactly sure. That's a really good question. I I hope that I'm generally a libertarian,
Mhm.
and I do think that government definitely has uh,
By the way, you're free to speak your
its
mind. You're
place.
like, this is a, feel free to share
No,
whatever
for
opinion
sure.
you have. Yeah.
For sure. So the way that I look at it is that any problem you can solve without government is typically a better way to solve it. Now there are some
Okay.
that you can. There's definitely a tragedy of the commons, and so there are certainly some problems that it's a right tool for the job. But I'm certainly hoping that we can create some protocols and standards that don't require government innovation. And we've done that with the internet many times before. That's not something that we haven't succeeded at. So looking at just how the internet's built
Mhm.
was very much from the ground up. So I'm hoping that we can get a few more of those in.
It could also, I just thought of, two ideas. If a company could do it, or if one of these big AI companies or big tech companies could do it in-house and build something, it could be a competitive advantage. Or if someone wants to come along and I don't know how the coding would work here, but build some kind of framework for this kind of private, I almost don't want to use the word regulation because I feel like that's very harsh, but some kind of privacy protection or kind of misinformation check. If someone could build something like that, will be cool to see if that could happen.
It's exciting. I think that blockchain definitely has a huge piece to play with that, where we can do it in a trustless way. Um, it definitely has its drawbacks, but I think it's the right tool for the job for some of these problems.
For sure. To switch gears a bit here, and this might be a bit of a wacky way to look at things, but do you ever worry that AI is going to get so strong that it might take up a mind of its own? Or do you ever think like, these robots could start to kind of make independent choices?
No, that's a great question, and definitely one that I think that we had a lot of more worries before, when we had a more of a simplistic view of AI. So the the old the only problem with AI that really kept me up at night before was the replicator problem of the idea that, if you have an AI who's optimized for a very, let's call it, micro goal, you could still have it be infinitely intelligent. So the idea is that, could you have an AI whose only job was to make not micro, but paper clips, and
Mm.
so then it realizes, well, if it's gonna make all the paper clips, or the best paper clips, it's going to need to, take over manufacturing. It's probably going to create some Martian bases, and like, it's a very micro goal, but you can extrapolate the intelligence to any level to solve that micro goal.
Mm.
And so we would want to give the AI a goal that was still fully aligned with our goals, and therefore, what's the right nuanced goal? And so that became like the alignment problem. But as we're making real advances with AI, a couple things are emerging. A is that the way that these AIs are operating, especially these large language models, if it is conscious, it's not conscious in any way that we would recognize, because it would be a form of consciousness that would wake up when you trigger a certain data point,
Mhm.
and then it outputs something, and then it falls back asleep with having now adjusted itself to saying, like, okay, was that the right output or the wrong output? But essentially, it's something that would be a conscious that would
Run
wake
off
and
data
sleep
instead of
only on these
intuition.
points.
Got it. Okay, so
Yeah.
it would run on data as opposed to running on intuition, and that's kind of what would make something human.
Not only that, but it also wouldn't be conscious with a strong through line. It's not trying to do it doesn't have a sense of self that exists across multiple context windows. When you ask it to do something, it just is only alive in that context window, and then when it goes to sleep, it goes to sleep. It doesn't carry that forward to other context windows.
Got
It
it.
it does to a certain degree, because we're training the model based on this was a good or a bad output, but not in any way that we would recognize as real consciousness with a through line between those experiences. And the other point is, it doesn't have a will outside of those um,
Parameters.
prompts, outside of those requests.
Hmm. Okay. Did you ever see the movie I, Robot by any chance?
Yes,
Do you think that's ever, at least in our lifetime, a remote possibility of something like that, or do you think that's like way sci-fi down the line, if even possible?
I think that we can build something that would be that smart, but it's not going to have a body like that. So if we built something that was that smart, it wouldn't have those types of goals, and those types of goals wouldn't even make sense in the body that it would be built with. So I think that we can reach that level of intelligence, but not in that configuration by any stretch of the imagination ever.
God, I always thought, I remember watching that movie growing up. That was a really wild thing to think about. And it's crazy to think that I think we've developed something within AI that has maybe the mental capability, but to put it in that kind of shape, I think, I don't know. We'll see if that'll happen in our lifetimes, but definitely something to keep an eye on. On a bit more of a personal note, are there any AI tools that you probably use more than others, or kind of what are some of your favorite AI tools?
Yeah, the AI tool that I love more than anything else is not an AI tool at all. It's an automation tool. It's make.com. And
Mhm.
the reason why I love that tool, it's very similar to Zapier. If your audience knows Zapier, then they would know make.com does something similar. But I think make.com is both a lot more economical and a lot more intuitive once you learn it. And it's just better in a whole bunch of ways. But what it does is you can automate an action every time an action's taken on a certain platform. So if you receive an email, it can then update a spreadsheet, or if a spreadsheet gets updated, it can then update a CRM, and
Mhm.
it can do these integrations. But you can add middle steps to add an AI. So that means, what if every time you received an email, the AI read it, it drafted a response, and then added that to your draft box back onto the email. So you can all of a sudden not just use AI by opening a new window, typing a prompt, and then pressing enter. AI can be built directly into your business's operations with these kinds of integrations. And so I use make.com for automating a lot of things in our business and augmenting a lot of things.
That's really cool. On another personal note, I saw a really cool YouTube video of yours actually, where you really went in depth on the three levels of AI. So can you kind of just go a little more in depth, pun intended, on what those three levels are and kind of how we can use them?
A video on the three levels of AI. Could you remind me of the model I was thinking through there?
Sure. So I believe the first
Or like was
one,
the first one?
sure. So I believe the first one was kind of, I forget the exact name of it, but I remember there was an analogy about some like AI being able to play chess, doing something very basic. And then there was something above that where kind of AI had like slightly more inputs and was able to make a little bit more calculated decisions along the lines.
Got it. So this was like with playing chess. I can talk a little bit about that because I think it at I don't remember the exact video you're talking about, but
No
I could
worries.
definitely talk about that. Um, so we we've we've asked these large language models to play chess, and it's kind of hilarious to watch because they start making illegal moves almost right away. Like at the very beginning, they might do like the London system or like Indian. I think it's called like Indian defense or whatever it's called. But so they do some of the most common moves up front, but then they just start doing things where it's like the bishop moves past a pawn, and just it starts doing some crazy stuff that is illegal in the game of chess. And the reason why is the exact same reason that if you ask it to calculate a large number, it's going to fail because it's
Okay.
doing it from a bottom
Bottoms
up
up.
versus a top down way. Which another way you could say that is it doesn't have an internal model of reality. And maybe this is what that video is about. Is it like the next level of AI that I'm really excited for is an AI that has that internal model of reality
Hmm.
that it can then test and iterate with to then um, make sure that the moves it would make on the chessboard, in the calculator, in the whatever, are the correct moves. But that internal model of reality has to come from a top down sort of simulated reality view. It has to be something that obeys the natural laws of physical reality. But if we can nail that, then I think that's a huge innovation. That's going to be the next big thing that allows us to really embody AI in the real world. Um, and we just don't have the tools for that yet. Large language models aren't going to get there by themselves.
How far away do you think we are from like a top-down AI?
It's hard to say because it's going to take a new type of innovation. So
Hmm.
it's not it's like we were talking about before at the very beginning of this with S curves. That's going to need to break new ground. And it's not a matter of right now a big part of the innovations we're getting is just throwing more data or better formatted. Like now we're actually getting to the point where we're just formatting the data better. It's like, oh shit, that's helping a lot.
Yeah, it's better.
Um so we're getting better and better results from more and more clean and better data, but we're still just on one treadmill. So predicting when that next innovation that's truly a new idea, that next white paper, like what attention is all you need was for us before, that's a really hard question. I do know that OpenAI have said that if they're still using um, if everything they're doing still uses transformers in 5 years, they're going to consider that a failure. So I do know that they're specifically aiming to get some major new ideas into the their wheelhouse in the next 5 years. But will they succeed on that? Sometimes 30 years passes by in a scientific field, and we think that it's a dead field. It just takes 30 years sometimes to get that next big idea. So will they succeed? They're pretty smart, so I'd say 5 to 10 years. Just giving them a little bit of leeway there is probably a safe bet.
How crazy is that? It's almost like 2 years ago we didn't have ChatGPT, and then in like 5 to 10 years we might have top to down models that are able to do like that are able to play chess at like the Carlson level.
Yeah, it would be the thing that will make that crazy is we already have top down AI that can play chess better than ChatGPT ever will,
Hmm.
because it's truly maximized, it's truly optimized. It's a known problem.
Hmm.
Um, and even if it's not, even our current models aren't perfectly knowing it. If we throw it at a supercomputer, it would perfectly know it. So it's still a confined problem. But the machine we're going to build is going to be one that can do that and have all the same abilities as that Magnus Carlsen would know if he was embodied correctly. So that it's It is insane to think about.
Deep Blue has some really good ancestors. We'll just we'll leave it at that. I want to move a bit into kind of psychology here and to ask more of a human nature question. I actually saw one of a post that you had that I thought was really interesting and something that I think really has resonated with me recently. And it's one of those things that's really easy to criticize as like an outsider, but like once you're actually doing it and you kind of feel these things, you're like, oh shit, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, from your perspective, as an entrepreneur yourself, what kind of like a correlation or relationship do you think creativity and fear have?
What's the correlation between creativity and
Or
fear?
what's the
I love
relationship
that
between
question.
creativity and fear?
So I'd say on a simplest level and probably the most effective level is that fear is a creativity killer. Um, and uh, I remember, we think that some people perform better under pressure. Some athletes that you think of, like, like Michael Jordan, like performs under pressure, or like Kobe and performs under pressure, and we refer to them that way. But when you actually do the statistics of all their shots, their worst averages were under pressure. Like, they're the same as the rest of us. It's just that their under pressure is way better than anyone else's under pressure. It's like, that's the guy to do it. But a lot of under pressure, like, you work better is kind of a myth. You certainly get more focused when you're under pressure, and that can release flow, and the flow is what gives you that superpower. But that's pressure and not fear. What fear really is on a neuroscientific level is the amygdala activating, and when that happens, there's less blood flow in the neocortex. And the neocortex, which is the front part of the brain, it's the newest. Neo is new. Cortex is word for the gray matter on the outside of the brain. It's the newest part. It's the part that is the furthest from the reptile brain, which is further in the back of the brain. So it goes, was it reptile brain, Labrador brain, mammalian, which is the mammal brain, and then the monkey brain, and then on top of the monkey brain is the neocortex, which is our part on top of it. So um, the further in the front of the brain is the newest parts of the brain on an evolutionary time scale. It's the parts that we are uniquely human, have that unique creativity. And when you're scared, there's less blood flow there. So fucking period, that's where the creativity comes from, and that's the part that's not getting blood. So it's just not going to help. With that being said, pressure can release flow, and I think that you can also get very creative when you have the right constraints in front of you that you have to make creative leaps. So problems can definitely be a big, and constraints can be a big aid of flow and creativity. But that's different from fear. That would be my answer. What about you guys? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Sure. So if there's anything that I've noticed recently, and this is coming from someone that took the leap to really try to grow their podcast full time and is right now somehow a one-man team. It's episode number 75, and Garik, I'm fortunate enough to have a very great guest in you. But if there's anything I've noticed, so it's like it's not like a binary answer. It's more of a dynamic answer. And what I mean by that is, I've had times certainly where like I've been behind in a few episodes and I've thought to my head like, oh shit, like I really want to get ahead of I really want to, catch up, because in addition to the episodes, there's like other things you have to worry about, other documents you have to worry about. You have to kind of make these videos, you have to like plan guests, basically like a whole shit show in your head. I'll put it that way. And whenever I'm, actively kind of focusing on this kind of stuff, and what's going on in my head is I feel very constrained. Maybe, you had like a great scientific explanation. I unfortunately don't have, that level of knowledge about the anatomy of our brain. But like, if there's any kind of feeling or any sensation that I have, it's that it's very constricted and it's very hard to kind of get into that flow state. But when I have days when I kind of get over the hump, or when I'm caught up on episodes,
Yeah.
or when I feel as though I'm ahead of everything, I feel as though I can like take a little bit of action and then kind of get into that flow state, and then really be able to kind of do a lot of work, but do it in a more creative. And while it's certainly difficult, there's just like a level of flow that goes into it for sure. And I think, to kind of go on a slight tangent from that, in addition to that, I think a lot of times when people perceive work, they almost go into, doing some kind of task. They perceive it as like, oh, this is annoying. Oh, I have to do this. But if you just kind of shift your mentality a little bit about here, and you can think of this as working out, kind of literally kind of going to the gym too. If you think about it as just kind of like dipping your toe in the pool, or kind of just getting started, and then kind of just like letting your mind just, kind of letting go in a way and just kind of doing things one by one, you'll notice that it's just like a much less strenuous impact on your brain. You can get into that flow
Yeah.
state. So that's like the part one. The part two to what you said in regards to kind of when we're under pressure, we have to give that creativity. I think a lot of times when I've been, I've been behind, but I think specifically the times that I've been very, very overwhelmed with kind of a lot of stuff, and there could be personal things going on as well. I think in those moments, it's almost like a sink or swim or a fight or flight. And I think in general, it's good to try to like fear less and like still be creative. But I think in those, moments when there's just like, we'll call it game 7 of the finals, or like when pressure's at its highest, I think at that point you have a choice whether to kind of like, sink or swim or like fight or flight. And I think those are some of the moments that produce like sensationally creative results. So I think broadly it's better to be more creative. But if you're, have a lot of constraints, I think like you have an active choice about whether you're going to like shut down or open up. So that's my theory around that.
Yeah, yeah. Flow, kind of like sex, it comes in a cycle, and there's a moment there's moments of relaxation, and there's moments of loading up the stress, of
Mhm.
tightening and then releasing, and flow does require that moment of pressure. But if you can get over the hump, then that's where the creativity comes on the far side. The way I think about fear is, it can be the wrong kind of pressure, but
Mhm.
if you can get but if that's the kind of pressure you need, and then you release it, the creativity can get loaded up on the far side of that. But then if you get back into fear, the creativity goes away again. So it, it pressure has a part of the cycle, but it needs to be in the right part of the cycle. That's how I
For
think
sure.
about it.
I think an example that I would use is like pressure, like someone, I don't want to say like, God forbid, but if someone has like a gun to their head or like is in a life threatening situation, I think like all bets are off. I think like you're just going to do everything you can to survive. But I think if you're in like a situation where, it's what you have to perform in order to provide, well, I don't want to say, provide food, because that's like a similar example to a gun to your head, you have to survive. But like when you're in a situation where you feel like you have to succeed, or like the alternative is like very, very bad, something that's not life threatening, yet very bad. I think that's when that creative genius can really come through. So it's a
Yeah.
really interesting dynamic there. I think a lot of things, a lot of this is like very psychology and kind of how we perceive things. And I think honestly, if we're not unless we're in a life threatening situation, I think a lot of fear and stuff, that are an illusion. But that's my thought. I don't have a PhD in this stuff, and we'll have to see what the studies stay in the future. I wanted to switch back to AI. Apart from our really interesting site conversation, looking forward, is there anything that you think AI can't replace?
I I think about AI in terms of inputs and outputs, and so if the input and the output is clear, then no, I don't think there's fundamentally anything that it can't not
Mhm.
do. Um, but then inputs and outputs can get stupidly complicated. So like, if I think about um the inputs and outputs of being a mom, like that's like 60 million years of evolution right
Mhm.
there, with all the context of everything that you've ever learned in your entire life, and your family history, and your like it's what the hell would that even look like?
Mhm.
And what the outputs even look like? So are we ever going to build AI to solve that? Well, if we have a computer the size of Saturn's moon, and like we don't have anything better to solve than that problem, it's like, well, maybe we could, but I don't think that we're that those are kinds of problems that we would even want to be solving, or try to be solving. So it's really about using AI for the problems that we want it to solve, advancing society, and um and going from there. That's kind of how I think about it, and it definitely keeps me excited to be working on this stuff.
We'll say it keeps you intrigued at night. I think that's a fair way to look at it. Uh,
Yeah.
as we've mentioned, AI has a ton of use cases. What's the use case that you're most excited for looking forward?
The use case I'm most excited for is a wider proliferation of people having their own personal AIs. So right now we interact for hours at a time with AIs that they're optimized to get attention, to release dopamine or release cortisol, or anything to drive engagement for advertising.
Mhm.
Because that's just we said we want a free internet, and the free internet means that you got to pay for it somehow, and so they
Yep.
paid for it by
Uh,
making us a product. And so that has a lot of inertia, and people think that the way things are now are going to be how they're always going to be. We probably, 100 years from now, we might, all bets are off. It could be in a totally different situation. But if there's a lot of inertia behind that business model, then probably the antidote is that each individual creates their own AI that's aligned not just with their short-term engagement goals, but with their long-term goals. What if you had an AI that changed your feed, not just to things that entertain you, but things that empowered you, to things aligned with your goals and what you're trying to achieve, and knew all the inputs about your online life and was optimized for what you want to do with your life. Like that's exciting for me.
That would be too ethical for any of these companies to do moving
But it
forward.
doesn't have to, because you could, it could be a Chrome extension. It
That
could
is
literally just run
that's a
on
really
your
good
local
point. Yeah,
device.
that was more satire in mine. I just know these social media companies have bad reps for some interesting practices. That's just that's an objective statement of what I've observed. I don't have any personal opinions on the matter. But I think it's also a really good idea. That's thinking outside the box of having a Chrome extension that kind of marries with the code. So I think that's a really good idea too. It's actually really funny when you're just what you just said regarding the 100 years ahead. So the last question I wanted to ask on a parting note, it's actually a really good way to segue into it. So I appreciate you kind of naturally bringing it up,
It's
but
all scripted.
it's all scripted. This is all
Daniel sent me a document, a
exactly
Word
just
doc
like
ahead of time. I'm just kind of reading it out.
the NFL season. Everything there was a script in the beginning. So, but on a parting note here, in one Garik, I have to say it's been an absolute fantastic time. I felt like Lex Friedman this whole time on our podcast. I think that's the peak of where you can get to. But on a parting note here, what do you think AI will look like 100 years from now?
So I've been working with AI directly, writing code with it and creating models with it for the last 6 years, and I've been following it very closely for my entire professional career. And I would say, 10 years ago, I would not have been nearly this optimistic about the future of AI. And that's because while the big players, thinking about, Microsoft and Apple and governments, will always have access to more resources than the regular man. Um, the newest models and the newest path that we've really been set on from OpenAI, which they're not nearly as open as they used to be, but
Pun
their
intended.
core founding model was still making it open, was democratizing it. And we found that the very best models seem to be the ones that have been democratized in a way that kind of makes sense, because the more people that interact with it, the smarter it's going to become. And so while bigger players will always have an advantage, um, the vision that I have 100 years from now is that this technology is significantly democratized, where everyone has access to this technology. And so long as this technology can continue to be moving forward in a way that respects us as individuals and is aligned with each individual's hopes and dreams and goals, I think we're going to be down a path that is really positive. And people think that things are going to be the way that they are right now. When you're scared, you think you're always going to be scared. When you're happy, you think you're always going to be happy. And when we see certain trajectories in culture, and we extrapolate in the future, it goes like a vector. But the reality is that the future is, never all things being equal. Like nothing ever stays equal, and so things are always going to be chaotic. But I think that right now we're getting more and more of a glimpse of an optimistic future where we have access to our own AI tools, access to our own data, and I think that's going to be a really positive future. The last thing I'll say about this answer, just if for those of you who are interested on like the specifics, is you can, at this point, without using ChatGPT, without using Google Gemini, you can run your own large language model from your own server, and it performs on levels similar to ChatGPT 3.5. Some of them are actually catching up in some metrics to GPT-4. That's the proliferation of the Llama model, which was leaked / released by
Mhm.
Facebook. You can run your own Llama model. I actually recommend people check out Vicuna on Llama 2 for this. You can run your very own large language model. And if we continue on that path with the open source community with individuals, using this technology in a way that they control themselves. I I think 100 years from now we could be in a incredibly good place. And so that's what I think we should be aiming for, and what I think is looking more and more likely now, especially compared to 10 years ago.
I can echo that thought. I hope 100 years from now the world is a much better place. And Garik, it's been an absolute blast. I think this is a really important topic and something that all people should really strive to educate themselves about. And I appreciate you providing that education for all of us. And again, it's been a hell of a time. And thanks for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Garik Tate. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.